Welcome back. This video is going to continue a discussion of some ideas that are part and parcel of the American founding, philosophical ideas. They're ideas from this video I'm going to be sharing are from a paper I wrote called From Being to Goodness to Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness in the journal Lex Naturalis a few years ago. And the ideas here are taken from the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas. In other words, what I'm after here is that if we are going to continue as a country, as a nation, the United States of America, that's the country I'm talking about, for those of you who may be listening outside the United States, this is our halfway to 500. 250 years of celebrating independence of the United States of America. And so we're looking at a kind of a celebration of the this anniversary, consequential anniversary, at an important time in our country's history. And I take the founding of the United States to be grounded in the Declaration of Independence. Some people don't agree with that, but that's my own view. And a couple of the principles in the Declaration are these ideas that there's an unalienable right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that inhere in each human individual, and in particular in individuals who are part of the United States of America. I would say these rights inhere in all human beings, but not all human beings are willing to do what our founders did and declare independence from another country based on these principles. Okay, so the ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as unalienable rights are grounded in a certain kind of metaphysics and a certain kind of metaethics. And in a previous video, I talked about the metaphysics and the metaethics, and got into some of the details of the metaethics behind the Declaration and its principles, and that kind of grounding of the metaethics, in my view, is founded in the nature of reality, understood as essential exemplification, and then grounded in a metaethics which identifies being and goodness as the same thing in objects. And so in that metaethical approach, I've been looking at 4 arguments from Thomas Aquinas which show the identity of being and good, and calling these 4 ways to good. So Aquinas has his famous 5 ways to God. These are 4 ways to good. I'm relying on a couple of philosophers and their interpretations of these arguments, particularly Eleanor Stump and Norman Kreisman in their article Being and Good in Aquinas, from a book edited by Scott McDonald on that topic. So in the last previous video, I talked about Aquinas' first way, his desire from his argument from desire, or appetunt, or aphaetai, that is the aim atness of any being that exists. So anything that exists aims at its own perfection, and from that you can derive the identity of being and good. Now Aquinas has at least 3 other ways that he does this, same kind of argument, and again, the purpose of this argument, these arguments are to show the identity of being and good, in order to show that any goodness that inheres in us, including our rights, our human rights, especially, or more narrowly, for our purposes, the purpose of the Declaration of Independence, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, those are in us in an unalienable way. And if the question is how, well, that's because we're certain kinds of things. We exemplify a certain kind of essence, namely our human essence, and the goodness of that essential exemplification just is the essential exemplification itself. So that's the identity of being good that we're after. So we're going to look at 3 arguments in this video that talk about these things, and they're not easy to follow. But look, for philosophers especially, if you think the Declaration of Independence, which is the foundation of our foundational document of our Semiquincentennial here in the United States, if you want to defend that, you better be able to defend the kind of metaethics and metaphysics that's behind it. So that's what this video is doing. All right, so we're going to look at the second way from what Aquinas calls corruption resistance. Okay, again, this is an argument for the identity of being and good. So Aquinas writes in the Summa Contra Gentiles that, further, the good is that which all desire. The philosopher introduces this remarks as a felicitous saying in his Ethics. But all things, each according to its mode, desire to be in act. This is clear from the fact that each thing according to its nature resists corruption. To be in act, therefore, constitutes the nature of the good. And I just have to read that last part again. Each thing according to its nature resists corruption. To be in act, therefore, constitutes the nature of the good. Now, he's talking about anything that exists, including the rocks and trees and the sky and the stars and you and me and things that we make. Okay. Hence it is that evil, which is opposed to good, follows when potency is deprived of act, as it is clear from the philosopher in Metaphysics 9, talking about Aristotle's metaphysics there. But as we have shown, God is being in act without potency, therefore he is truly good. Moreover, the communication of being and goodness arises from goodness. This is evident from the very nature of the definition of good. By nature, the good of each thing is its act and perfection. Now each thing acts so insofar as it is in act, and in acting it diffuses being and goodness to other things. Hence it is a sign of a being's perfection that it can produce its like, as may be seen from the philosopher in Meteorological Book 4. Now, the nature of the good comes from its being something appetible. Now, again, appetible means desirable, or that is that thing that directs its aim atness towards its final completion. Okay, the appetible is a tricky kind of term there. Back to Aquinas. This is the end, which is also moves the agent to act. That is why it is said that the good That is why it is said that the good is diffusive of itself and of being. But this diffusion befits God, because, as we've shown above, being through himself the necessary being, God is the cause of being for other things. God, therefore, is truly good. Okay, so now here's Stump and Kreutzmann interpretation of this argument for the identity of being and good in Aquinas from Corruption and Resistance. Here's quoting Stump and Kreutzmann. Everything resists its own corruption in accordance with its nature, a tendency he interprets as its aiming naturally at being fully actual, not merely partially or defectively in being. Thus, since goodness is what all things aim at or desire, each thing's goodness is its full actuality. Okay, so again, you've got this identity of the actuality, the aim atness, with its being, which is also its goodness. Okay. This argument seems, this is my commentary on this. This argument seems fairly straightforward, but it seems to only prove a relation between goodness and full actuality. To make this clear, a second argument seems to be needed to explicitly show that goodness and being are related. Here are how the two arguments seem to connect. So here's another argument. Premise 1. All things that resist their own corruption are full actuality. All goodness are things that resist their own corruption. Therefore, all goodness are full actuality. Premise 3. All full actuality are being. All goodnesses are full actuality. Therefore, all goodness are being. So now we've got all goodness are the end of Aquinas' argument is that being and good are identical. So now you've got these two arguments. So the second conclusion, the second way, it seems here, is similar to the second argument in the first way, in the argument above. So perhaps if this argumentation is correct, the second way to good can serve as an alternate or complementary route to the conclusion of the second argument in the first way, which focuses on something slightly different in terms of corruption resistance instead of mere appetency or aim atness. So one of the key notions in this quotation or selection from the Summa, which Stump and Kreutzmann use as the basis for their second way, are the following statements. And this is, I think, is important for this argument. To be in act constitutes the nature of the good. Okay, I'm going to say that again. To be in act constitutes the nature of the good. Okay, so you wonder, what is good? Well, it's constituted by being in act, or essential exemplification. So you say the sky is good, or the sun is good, or my existence is good, good of an artifact. What does that goodness consist in? It's constituted by its essential exemplification. So the tree exemplifies an essential nature, so do you and I. That's where our goodness comes from, and therefore that's where our natural rights come from. It's a huge, important idea. These ideas will become especially important when we look at Aquinas' understanding of how we know the nature of the good in our justification of the soundness of this argument. Okay, so let's look at the third way. This is an argument from teleology. So we looked at an argument from corruption resistance. Let's look at one from teleology, or essential teleology, or fulfillment. So Aquinas presents his third way in the Summa Theologica. And here's what he says, quoting Aquinas. First, because since everything desires its own perfection, man desires for his ultimate end that which he desires as his perfect and crowning good. As Augustine says in the City of God, he's quoting Aquinas here, in speaking of the end of good, we mean now, not that it passes away so as to be no more, but that it is perfected so as to be complete. It is therefore necessary, end quote, from Augustine back to Aquinas, it is therefore necessary for the last end so to fill man's appetite, that nothing is left besides it for man to desire. Now, whether or not the founders were thinking of this passage from Aquinas when they wrote The Pursuit of Happiness as an unalienable right, but if happiness, following Aristotle, is our completed perfection, Augustine seemed to get that, and so did Aquinas. That's part and parcel of our country, the United States. You are meant for happiness, in this sense, and you had better defend it. And lots of people have been defending it for the last 250 years, and before. The United States just didn't poof into existence ex nihilo. Right? It's a long tradition of defending these unalienable rights, and philosophers have been trying to do that for a long time, both pre-Christian and Christian. Stump and Kreutzmann interpret it, but it's only in the Christian that it becomes fulfilled. Right? The notion of happiness. Aristotle gets pretty close, Plato gets pretty close, but when you have God involved, the God of the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that's when things get really interesting and finally fulfilled. Stump and Kreutzmann interpret this passage from Aquinas this way. They say this, quote, what is desired solely for its own sake is what the desirer perceives as the desirer's final good, that in which the hierarchy of its desire culminates. What each desirer desires in that way is now notice this language, is the fulfillment of its own nature. Right? It's the fulfillment of your own nature. That's what's important. Each thing aims above all at being as complete, whole, and free from defect as it can be. Free from defect. Right? You wonder where freedom comes from? Our unalienable right to be free. Now, again, it's not freedom to do anything we wish. It's freedom to be consistent with our own nature of what we are. And that's an unalienable right. But the state of being, come back to Stump and Kreutzmann here, but the state of its being complete and whole is just the things being fully actual. Therefore, full actualization is equivalent to final goodness aimed or desired by everything, end quote. So here's another way to formalize this argument. All culmination of desire is fully actualized being. All final goods are the culmination of desire. Therefore, all final goods are fully actualized being. So this argument seems fairly straightforward. The major term, fully actualized being, would seem to be equivalent to being itself. This argument then contributes to the conclusions of the first two ways by emphasizing both the very teleological nature of being and goodness, as well as the completion of goodness and being as coextensive reality. Okay, one more way, then we'll wrap up. This is the fourth way, Aquinas' fourth way to good, the argument from aiming at being. So Aquinas also presents a fourth way to good in the Summa. He says this, quote, besides, every action and movement are seen to be ordered in some way toward being, either that it may be preserved in the species or in the individual, or that it may be newly acquired. Now, the very act of being is a good, and so all things desire to be, therefore action and movement are for the sake of the good. This is why the philosophers, in defining the good, have said the good is that which all desire. As Dionysius states, all crave the good and the best, end quote. So Stump and Kreutzmann take this passage and interpret it in this way. He's quoting Stump and Kreutzmann. Every action is ordered toward being, toward preserving or enhancing being in some respect, either in the individual or its species, and acting all things aim at being. Therefore, again, being is what all things desire, and so being is goodness. So the way in which, end quote, okay. The way in which Stump and Kreutzmann formulate this argument is puzzling because the predicate term of the conclusion, being is goodness, doesn't show up in the premises of the text. Perhaps it's enthymemic in the following way. All desires aimed at are good. All being are desires aimed at. Therefore, all being are good. Or all being is good. If this is right, then it seems like the fourth way, like the first way, only gets us to all being are good, but not to all good or being. If this is a stronger conclusion, is what Aquinas and Stump and Kreutzmann are after, then a second argument would be needed, maybe something like this. All desires aimed at are being. All good are desires aimed at. Therefore, all good are being. So that gives you the two parts of, if these are categorical syllogisms. This is the combination of C and C star here, these two conclusions, as in the first way, give us a stronger identity claim between being and good. So again, what we've walked through here are three arguments that demonstrate that existence or being is identical to goodness. So everything that exists is good. Okay, so now you might think, well, that's kind of weird. And it is. It's a strange thing to say, but it's rather obvious. Because everything that exists exemplifies an essential nature. But that exemplification of an essential nature is a kind of perfection, an aim-atness, a fulfillment of an object's tendency towards being, and therefore perfections, because all perfections are good, then you have goodness and being identical. That's another way to think about it. A similar way, crossing over between these four ways from Aquinas. Okay. So you might think, again, what's the point of this? Well, look, let me reiterate. Our semiquincentennial of 250 years of the founding of the United States is an attempt to remind us of this anniversary of the founding document, which is the Declaration of Independence. In that declaration, there is a brief description of some of our unalienable rights. Among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So you might think, what are those rights? What is the nature of those rights? How are they unalienable? Well, Aquinas gives us what we might call both the metaphysics and the metaethics to understand that. The metaphysics is that anything that's real, anything that exists or to exist, is to exemplify an essential nature. So human beings have an essential nature that distinguishes us, not in our existence, but in the kinds of thing that we are from ordinary natural objects, animals, or other beings that might be angels, God, the ocean, stars, minerals, the elements, whatever, even artifacts, things that we create. And it's in our essential nature that our goodness is found, okay, as human beings. And so our goodness is identical to our essential nature. Those two things are the same thing. We can distinguish them in reason, but in us they are identical. Now, if they inhere in us, given our existence or our existential nature, then they are unalienable. They can't be removed from us because of the kinds of things that we are. And these philosophical arguments rationally demonstrate that. You can't, it's impossible. If these arguments work, you cannot alienate these rights. It's impossible. So that gives us a way philosophically to defend the Declaration of Independence. Now, maybe for the next 250 or 2,500 years. We have a republic if we can keep it.
Stay psyched, Grom. You.